The ring has been in my jacket pocket for 11 weeks. I find it sometimes when I reach for my keys, that small, hard weight sitting against my palm for just a fraction of a second before I remember what it is and keep moving. I don't wear it. I don't miss wearing it. What I miss is being the person who didn't yet know what I know. My name is Nathan Cole. I'm 32 years old. For 6 years, I was in a relationship with a woman named Serena. For 4 of those years, she was my wife. If you find this story useful in any way, do us a favor, hit like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. We lived in a condo I'd owned since before we met. A 2-bedroom in Lincoln Square on the 3rd floor of a gray-stoned building 1 block from the Brown Line. I bought it when the neighborhood was still in the process of figuring out what it wanted to be. By the time Serena moved in after the wedding, it had mostly figured that out and taken the property tax assessments up with it. My work is environmental assessment, soil contamination, water table analysis, remediation planning. I run a small LLC and work independently, spending roughly a third of my week in the field and the rest producing reports that few people will ever open, but that occasionally prevent someone from pouring a foundation over a former industrial waste site. The work isn't dramatic, but it's mine, and it pays reliably. I mention this not to paint myself as someone who had everything together. You can form your own conclusions, but because the financial dimension of what happened matters. And it matters more once you understand I came into this marriage on stable ground. I wasn't drifting. I understood what things cost, and I chose to spend them anyway. Serena was a brand strategist at a firm in the West Loop. Perceptive, socially effortless, funny in a way that could become precise without warning. The kind of person who could diagnose what was wrong with a campaign in under a minute, and then spend 2 hours guiding a client toward the conclusion they'd arrived at together. I don't say this to cast her in a difficult light. It's simply accurate, and accuracy is the only thing I can reliably offer at this point. She suggested marriage counseling. She made the appointment, chose the therapist, and framed the whole thing as maintenance rather than repair. Good relationships don't just happen, she told me. They require investment. We had 3 sessions with a doctor, Eleanor Marsh, whose office was on the 14th floor of a building on North Michigan Avenue. On clear days, the window framed a long slice of the lake. On most days in early March, it framed gray. 2 chairs, a small table between them, the specific quality of silence that belongs to rooms designed to hold the things people have been carrying without saying. The 3rd session was a Tuesday evening. I drove. Serena was quiet on the way over, the same preemptive stillness she always adopted before something she'd been planning. The same way she went still before a client presentation. I noticed it. I didn't ask about it. We sat in the usual arrangement. Doctor. Marsh opened the session the way she always did, directing her first question to Serena. From the beginning, she had established that Serena needed more of an invitation to speak than I did. In hindsight, that tells you something. Serena started the way she usually started, measured, building toward something, a person constructing a case in real time. She talked about disconnection. She talked about looking at the future and feeling something she couldn't name. She talked about the way our conversations had gone functional, practical, stripped of whatever had once made them feel like more than logistics. And then something in her voice went flat. She stopped addressing Dr. Marsh. She turned and looked directly at me, and when she spoke again, it was in the voice she used when the decision had already been made and she was simply notifying the room. I think I stopped loving you years ago, honestly. The ventilation system was the loudest thing in that room for a few seconds. Dr. Marsh set her pen down on the notepad, not placed it, not rested it, set it down, the way you do when your hands need to be free for whatever comes next. Her face was professionally composed, and underneath the composure was something that looked a lot like dismay. The words weren't ambiguous, they weren't softened by qualification or buried in context, and the word she'd placed at the end, honestly, that word wasn't a verbal filler. In most sentences it functions as one. In that one, it was load-bearing. She wasn't expressing a passing doubt. She was making a declaration, and she'd meant it specifically enough to say it in front of a therapist. I sat with it for 4 seconds, maybe 5. Then I stood up. The ring came off cleanly. It always had. It had never fit tight. And I placed it on the low table between the chairs. Not dropped, not thrown, set down, the way you return a borrowed key. Then I picked up my jacket. Then we're done here. I walked to the door. Behind me, I heard Serena's voice change. The flatness was gone, replaced by something urgent and unsteady. Wait, I didn't mean right now. The door closed. I made sure it closed quietly. The lobby had a security desk, 2 elevators, and a row of chairs built to look comfortable without actually being comfortable. I sat in one and looked at my phone. The time was 6:12 p.m. I wasn't in shock. Shock requires something unexpected. What Serena had said in that room was unexpected in its delivery, but not entirely in its content. Something had been wrong for a long time. I'd told myself it was the pressure of adult life, the natural compression of a long relationship, Chicago winter pulling everyone inward. What she said in that room didn't create a new reality. It just made the existing one impossible to interpret any other way. I texted my old running partner, Owen, a message I'd been putting off for the better part of a year. Free Saturday morning? Before Serena, Owen and I had run every Saturday along the lakefront. During the marriage, I'd gradually traded those mornings for her schedule. Brunches, errands, her friends' events. Owen had never made it an issue. He'd just kept the window open. He responded in 2 minutes. Been waiting. Montrose at 7. I confirmed, put the phone away, drove home, and sat in the underground garage with the engine off for 20 minutes. Not in crisis, not dramatizing anything, just letting the session settle into its permanent shape before I went upstairs and made dinner. Pasta at the kitchen counter, which I hadn't done since before the wedding. Serena arrived about 40 minutes after I did. She must have taken a rideshare because I had the car. Her coat was still on, bag at her shoulder, and in her right hand she held my ring. She'd taken it from the session room. She placed it on the kitchen counter without ceremony. We should talk, she said. Tonight? Yes, Nathan, tonight. All right, go ahead. Nothing came. We circled each other conversationally for about 20 minutes without landing anywhere, and then she went to bed. I stayed up with the television on and nothing worth watching. The ring sat on the counter. It stayed there. Monday arrived the way Mondays do, abruptly, without adequate warning. Serena and I had a morning routine that had calcified over 4 years into something resembling choreography. I woke first, made 2 cups of coffee, brought hers to the nightstand while she was still in bed. She'd come to the kitchen around 7:15 for the second cup, and we'd talk about the day ahead in that unhurried, ambient way you talk before it's actually started. That morning, I made 1 cup, mine. The act of filling a single mug where 2 had always been filled was small in practical terms and large in everything else, and I stood at the counter aware of both dimensions simultaneously. Serena came to the kitchen, saw the single cup, and stopped in the doorway. You didn't make mine. I made mine. There's a full pot if you want it. That's not the point. What is the point? No answer. She poured her own cup and took it to the bedroom. I finished mine at the counter and opened my laptop to update the household grocery order. Removed her oat milk, her Greek yogurt, her wine. When the revised order confirmed, the total had dropped by $47. I left for work without the usual exchange at the door. Before the session, I'd managed our shared Google Calendar, dinner reservations, social events, her work functions. That morning, I removed myself from it, created a new one, and migrated everything that was mine. A dinner invitation from Serena's colleague, Julia, scheduled for the following Friday. I declined my side directly, a brief message to Julia. Won't be able to make it, sorry for the short notice. The workday was ordinary. Site visit to a decommissioned industrial lot in Pilsen. Ground-penetrating radar, frozen earth, a clipboard, and the uncomplicated focus that fieldwork always provides. The situation with Serena existed in the background as a fact, solid and defined, no longer a question and not yet a wound. That evening she was home when I arrived. She'd been on the phone. I caught the name Rachel before she wrapped the call. We ate dinner and she told me about a difficult client interaction. Her voice had the particular cadence of someone expecting the questions that would signal she was being listened to. Instead, I said, "That sounds frustrating," and returned to my food. She looked at me with the expression of someone beginning to understand that the room has rearranged itself, even though none of the furniture has actually moved. After dinner, I went to the armchair. That was new. For 4 years we had defaulted to the couch together, her tucked against my side. The physical shorthand of two people who have spent long enough together to settle into each other's geometry. From the armchair, I could see her register the distance. She put her hand on the cushion beside her. "You can sit here. I'm fine here." A long pause. She took her hand back. We watched something neither of us was actually watching. At some point, I noticed the ring was no longer on the counter. I didn't ask about it. Tuesday. By the second day, the pattern was becoming readable and she was beginning to read it. I stopped sending the midday texts that had been a fixture of our daily exchange for years, the article link, the photo of something I'd seen on a job site, the running commentary on the city. Those texts had been, I realized, a continuous proof of presence, a daily demonstration that she occupied my thoughts, a daily gift I'd been giving without ever asking what was being given back. By 2 p.m. she sent one. "You're quiet today." I read it, set the phone down, and finished the paragraph one was drafting. That evening, "Why did you leave the shared calendar?" "I figured you'd prefer to manage your own schedule." "What does that mean?" "It means I removed myself from it. You still have full access to yours." She stared at me. I returned to my laptop. The frustration in her expression wasn't quite anger. It was the frustration of someone who has been fluent in another person for years and has just discovered the language has changed overnight. Wednesday arrived gray and damp, the kind of Chicago March that can't decide whether it's still winter. Serena had had a genuinely bad day. Her creative director had overridden a campaign she'd spent 3 weeks building. A client had been dismissive in a review meeting, and her car was making a sound she didn't recognize. Under the terms of what had been our marriage, this was my cue. I knew her stress the way you know a familiar route, which turns to anticipate, which sections to slow through. I would have asked the right questions in the right sequence, helped her reconstruct the case for why she was correct, called a mechanic on her behalf, ordered from her preferred restaurant without being asked. Instead, I listened for a few minutes and said, "That sounds really hard." She stopped mid-sentence. "That's all? Do you want advice or do you need to get it out? I want you to actually be here. I'm listening, I'm just not sure what you need from me." The sentence landed in a way that reorganized the air in the room. For years she had never had to tell me what she needed. I had simply known. The act of asking instead of anticipating was not, I think, subtle. It registered. She excused herself to take a shower, and through the door I heard the quiet sound of someone releasing something that had been accumulating pressure. I made dinner. I did not follow. That night on the couch, she reached for my hand. I gave her fingers a brief, neutral squeeze and moved my hand back to my lap. She said nothing. She was beginning to understand that what she'd said in that room had a shape, and that the shape had already set. Thursday. We were in the hallway near the bedroom when she reached for me in the specific way she always had when she wanted closeness. A gesture mi pareja, practiced and precise, it had become its own kind of language. I stepped back, not sharply, gently. "I'm not there right now." "It's been almost a week, Nathan. I know how long it's been." She studied me. "You're punishing me. I'm being honest about where I am. You told me honesty was important to you." The echo of her own stated values landing in her own ears. She didn't push further. We went to bed in the same bed with the particular silence of a distance that had been measured and fixed in place. Friday evening of that first week, I opened the household spreadsheet. I review finances on the last Friday of every month. Not obsessively, as a habit, the same way I log field data. That Friday I added a column, not to build a case, because I realized I had been tracking incomplete data. The mortgage on the condo was mine. had been mine since before the wedding. $2, $100 a month, 4 years of records in my name only. Serena contributed roughly $400 toward utilities and groceries in a good month. The gap between what the household cost and what she contributed averaged approximately $600 per month. Over 4 years of marriage, $28, $800 in what I had never once thought of as a subsidy because I hadn't been thinking of it as a transaction. I had been thinking of it as a life. Discretionary spending, the birthday dinners, the weekend at a lakefront resort, the bottles of wine I brought home Friday evenings, the steady accumulation of small gestures, annual average roughly $3, $400. Over 4 years, $13, $600. Anniversary dinner deposit, non-refundable, $340. I called and canceled it. Therapy copays at $85 per session, 3 sessions, $255. Total, rough estimate, north of $143, 000. I closed the laptop without ceremony. What I felt wasn't righteous anger. It was recognition. The feeling of finally measuring a room you've been living in and finding it's a different size than you'd assumed. I had given those things freely, every dollar of them. The number wasn't an indictment of Serena. She hadn't taken what I hadn't offered. What it was an accurate accounting of what choosing someone looks like when you convert it to material terms. The question was never whether I had given enough. The question, the only one that had ever mattered, was whether that giving had been going somewhere real. She came home around 8:30 and scanned the kitchen counter. Nothing. There was nothing there. No wine, no takeout, no small standing offering. You always bring something on Fridays. Used to. She looked at me. I looked back. Not cold, not performing distance, not making a point, simply no longer performing presence. There's a difference. And she was beginning to feel it. Saturday morning, I ran for the first time in nearly a year. The lakefront trail north of Montrose Harbor has no interest in whatever you're carrying when you arrive. The wind comes off the water without consideration, and the path goes north or it goes south, and your only job is to move. I had forgotten how much I needed that. The run was slow and a little painful in the way that returning to something physical always is. But by the time I turned and started south again, something had loosened. I came home to find Serena at the kitchen table with 2 cups of coffee and the posture of someone who has rehearsed what they're about to say. I want to talk about where we are, properly. I sat across from her. All right, what I said in the session, I shouldn't have said it that way. How should you have said it? She took a moment. I was trying to express that I've been feeling uncertain, disconnected. I didn't mean it as a final statement. You said you stopped loving me years ago. I was speaking from frustration. You said honestly at the end. I think I stopped loving you years ago, honestly. Those were your exact words. I looked at her. What part of that was frustration? She had no answer for the word. The word was the problem. I don't want to lose this marriage, she said. What you said in that room told me the marriage was already gone. I just hadn't been notified yet. That's not fair. Which part isn't accurate? She changed angles, a lateral pivot to new ground when one position stopped working. Can we go back to Dr. Marsh together? No. Why not? Because the last session ended with you telling me you stopped loving me years ago. I'm not interested in paying $85 a session to discuss what years means. She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup and looked at the table. I refilled my water bottle, found my keys, and drove to the storage unit on Irving Park Road where my woodworking tools had been sitting since before the wedding. Spent the rest of the afternoon moving the second bedroom into a workspace. By evening the bench was assembled, the tools sorted, sawdust on the floor. I ate dinner standing at the kitchen counter and felt, in the most neutral possible sense, like someone recovering a signal that had gone missing. The following Tuesday evening, my phone rang. Rachel, Serena's closest friend, whose own divorce had finalized about 8 months earlier. Her opening was warm in the careful way of someone who has a purpose and is moving toward it gradually. Serena is really struggling, she said. She says you've completely shut down since the session, not talking, not engaging. She feels like she's living with a stranger. Did she tell you what she said at the session? She said she shared some doubts about the relationship and you walked out. She told Dr. Marsh and me verbatim that she stopped loving me years ago. That was the specific phrasing. A long pause. She said it that specifically. Those were the exact words. I didn't know it was that specific. I didn't walk out on her doubts, Rachel. I walked out on the information she gave me. Another pause. I'm sorry, Daniel. I didn't have the full picture. Now you do. She didn't call back. I noted that she'd used the word doubts rather than stopped loving you, which meant the version of the story Serena had given her had been edited. I didn't yet know how much had been left out. That came later. Thursday, I came home from a site visit to find Serena's mother, Carol, sitting in my living room. Coat still on, tea untouched on the table in front of her. She wasn't wearing the expression of a woman who had come prepared to challenge someone. She was wearing the expression of a woman who had already done her thinking and was sitting quietly with the conclusion. Hello, Carol. Nathan. She stood briefly. Rachel called me. I set down my field bag. Ma pareja, Rachel had told her. I hadn't expected that, but it made sense. People who have been through their own damage are often thorough. Serena was in the armchair across the room, and the energy between them was not what I'd walked in expecting. It was taut in a different direction. Carol was not here to make a case against me. I told your mother what you actually said, I said to Serena. Serena looked at the middle distance. She didn't correct me. Carol turned to her daughter. You told me he walked out because you were trying to have an honest conversation. I was trying to. You told him you stopped loving him years ago, in front of a therapist. Carol's voice wasn't raised. It was the quieter kind of confrontational, the kind that has taken time to think through what it wants to say. And then you called me to tell me he was being cold and distant. It's more complicated than... I'm sure it is. Carol was quiet for a moment, then came to stand at the kitchen counter across from me. I'm sorry, Nathan. I came in here with half the story. It's fine. You care about her. She let out a slow breath, then went back to Serena, and they had an exchange I was present for but not part of. I poured a glass of water and stayed at the counter and let it proceed. Carol was not cruel. She was systematic, the way mothers of adult children sometimes become when the version of events they were given doesn't hold together under pressure. She hugged Serena when she left. Something complicated in it, something that wasn't entirely comfort, and then hugged me on her way out. Brief, pressed, carrying something that felt like acknowledgement. After the door closed, Serena sat in the armchair without moving. I can't believe you did that. I answered your mother's questions. You were in the room. You humiliated me in front of her. I told her the truth in response to a version of events that wasn't complete. That's correction, not humiliation. She looked at me with something I hadn't seen before. Not anger, not frustration. A sharper kind of pain. The pain of someone watching a situation they believed they could manage move steadily outside the range of their management. Friday evening of the second week, Serena was at the kitchen table when I got home, laptop open, with the posture of someone who has decided this is the actual conversation, the one she's been building toward for 2 weeks. I need to tell you something, she said, about the session, about why I said what I said. I hung up my jacket and sat down across from her. Before the session, Rachel and I talked for a long time. She'd been telling me for months that I needed to. Her exact phrase was test the foundation of the marriage, to find out if what we had was real or just comfortable. I was quiet. She said that if I said something that genuinely challenged the relationship and you responded by fighting harder, being more present, reaching for it, that would tell me the foundation was solid. And if you pulled back or went cold, it would confirm that what we had was already hollow. And the specific thing she suggested you say. Serena looked at the table. She said to be honest about doubts. Strongly, specifically, specific enough that you'd take it seriously. Mi pareja, I think I stopped loving you years ago, honestly. That was a strategy. The words were mine. But the idea was hers. She turned the laptop toward me. She sent me the thread. I read it. The thread spanned several weeks, and Rachel's coaching had been specific and consistent. Tell him how serious it is. Make him feel the uncertainty. See if he rises to meet it. I read for about a minute, then turned the laptop back. She told you that a man who is genuinely invested will fight when he feels the relationship threatened, and that walking away means the commitment was never real. Yes, and when I walked out, she told you that confirmed the marriage was hollow. She said it meant you'd already checked out emotionally. I looked at her steadily. Here is what actually happened. You made a statement. I treated it as one. You said you'd stopped loving me years ago, and you said it honestly, and I chose to believe you because the alternative would have required me to treat your words as less than honest. And you've always told me honesty mattered to you. I wanted you to tell me I was wrong. I wanted you to push back, get emotional, fight for it. I did something. I placed the ring and I left. That was my response. You couldn't have meant it to be final. You said you didn't mean right now. Those were the words you said in the hallway. But you meant it enough to say it the way you said it, in front of a therapist, in the voice you use when you've already decided. You meant it enough to plan it in advance with your closest friend. What you meant right now is less interesting to me than what you were willing to say. She was crying, not performed, real. The kind that comes when a person runs out of the version of the story they've been using and has to stand in the actual thing itself. Rachel went through a painful divorce and came out thinking she had a map, I said. She gave you that map and you used it on a marriage that didn't need a test. It needed a conversation. Any ordinary evening you could have sat across from me and said you were scared, that you felt us drifting. Instead, you ran a diagnostic, and the diagnostic gave you information you weren't prepared to use. I'm sorry. I know. Can we start over? You can't test something to the point of breaking and then ask it to rebuild. I paused for a moment. When a site has been compromised, you don't remediate it by pretending the contamination didn't happen. You map it, account for it, and plan from what's actually there. She looked at me for a long time. The old urgency that used to live in me whenever things went unresolved between us, the automatic drive to close the gap, restore equilibrium, make it right, was simply gone, the way a sound disappears when its source is removed. She stood up, reached into the pocket of her jacket, and placed my wedding ring on the counter between us. I've been carrying it all week, she said. I keep thinking you'll want it back. Not yet. When? I don't know. She went to bed. The ring stayed on the counter. I sat at the table for another hour in the quiet of a space I owned and had always owned, thinking about the gap between a life that is genuinely shared and a life that is managed for someone else's comfort. The gap had always been there. I had simply declined to measure it. The following Monday, I called the offices of Schiller, Dunham & Associates, the kind of Chicago family law firm that has seen enough complicated endings that nothing in their conference room surprises them. I scheduled a consultation for Wednesday. I didn't tell Serena immediately. I wanted to understand the shape of what came next before I committed to a direction. The consultation ran 45 minutes, no unnecessary reassurance, just information. Organized clearly. The condo was a premarital asset, 4 years of mortgage records in my name alone, well protected, no children, uncontested, 4 to 6 months from filing. I left with a folder and a cleaner map. That evening I sat across from Serena at the kitchen table. I want you to know something before you hear it from somewhere else. I met with a family law attorney today. She went still. You went to a lawyer. I gathered information. I'm telling you now. My pareja, that's it. You've decided. You made a statement in that room almost 2 weeks ago. I'm following the direction it pointed. I didn't mean right now. She reached for the phrase the way you reach for a light switch in a familiar room, only to find the switch has been removed. I didn't mean right now. That phrase is going to stop working eventually. She went to the bedroom. I watched a documentary about the Chicago River's long reversal and went to bed at 10:30. Over the following 2 weekends, Serena packed. A colleague had offered a spare room while she found her footing, and she moved in stages, a carload Saturday, another Sunday, the quiet logistics of a shared life sorting itself back into two separate inventories. She asked for half the kitchen items, which was reasonable, and I agreed to all of it without negotiation. Pans, the good cutting board, the Dutch oven from her aunt. Fine, none of it was worth the argument. The last item was a framed photograph in the hallway. Our first trip together, a weekend at a lake resort, a photograph someone else had taken of us laughing at something neither of us could now name. She held the frame and looked at it for a moment. "Can I take this? It's yours." She carried it to the elevator. I stood in the doorway and watched until the elevator doors closed, and then I went inside and closed my own door. Stood for a moment looking at the faded rectangle of wall where the photograph had hung for 4 years. Then I went to the second bedroom and spent 2 hours at the workbench with my hands in the wood, walnut shelves half assembled, shavings curled on the floor, until my mind went quiet. There's a version of this story where what followed was lightness, sudden expansion, the relief of a difficult thing finally resolved. That version isn't accurate. What actually happened was quieter. A gradual return to a version of myself that had been operating at reduced capacity for long enough that I'd forgotten what the other version felt like. Owen and I ran every Saturday. The pace improved week over week. By the 4th week, we were doing 8 miles along the lakefront, talking the way old friends talk, easily about everything and nothing, the conversation that doesn't require an audience or a performance. I hadn't realized how much energy the marriage had been consuming in that particular way. The continuous management of Serena's emotional weather, the calibration of my own mood to match hers, the low-grade attention required to maintain a dynamic where one person is always slightly more present than the other. Running with Owen required nothing, just showing up. The woodworking became a real project. The walnut shelves became a floor-standing unit. I started sourcing wood for a side table that had lived in my head for years without ever being built. The work gave back something I hadn't known was missing, the satisfaction of a thing that simply is what it is. No subtext, no ongoing negotiation. I called my college friends in Cincinnati, a group chat that had been carrying on around my silence for months. When I came back into it, nobody made a ceremony of my return. The conversation folded me back in without interruption, and within 10 minutes, it was just people talking again. 3 weeks after Serena moved out, I ate dinner alone at the restaurant we'd always gone to for her birthday, the one where I'd always covered the full bill. I sat at the bar, ordered the chicken I'd always wanted, and whatever the bartender recommended. The check was $34. Dinner on a Tuesday because I felt like it. A few weeks after she left, I ran the final numbers. Mortgage coverage over 4 years, $100, $800. Monthly household gap between cost and contribution, $28, $800. Discretionary relationship spending, dinners, the resort weekend, the standing small gestures, $13, $600. Canceled anniversary deposit and therapy copays, $595. Rough total, north of $143,000. Add the softer items, event tickets, occasional cash on difficult months, car help, and the figure probably landed closer to $150,000. I wrote it down, looked at it, and closed the file. I ran it not to build a case. I ran it because I believe in knowing the actual cost of things, and for 4 years I had deliberately not applied that principle to the most significant financial relationship in my life. The number wasn't an indictment of Serena. She hadn't taken what I hadn't offered. The indictment, if there was one, was entirely my own. My willingness to track everything in my professional life with precision and almost nothing personal with the same standard. I looked at it, I closed it. The question was never whether I had given enough. The question was whether what I'd given had been going where I thought it was going. Serena texted twice in the weeks that followed. Week 6, I keep thinking about what you said, that you can't test something to the point of breaking and then ask it to rebuild. You were right. I understand that now. I read it, set the phone down. After a day, I replied, I know. Week 9, longer, more exposed. I miss you. Not the version of you I needed you to be, not what I was testing for. Just you, the actual person. I keep wondering if there was a version of this that could have been different. I read that one several times over 3 days, patient with it the way I'm patient with complicated field data. Then I wrote back, there was a version, one where you sat down with me on any ordinary evening and said you were scared. That version would have worked. This one didn't. She didn't reply. I hadn't expected her to. Sometimes the honest answer to a question closes the door the question was trying to reopen. The most respectful thing you can do is let it close. This morning, a Sunday in late April, the lake still that particular gray-green of early season, Chicago releasing winter on its own schedule. Owen was already at Montrose Harbor when I arrived. He was doing the arm circles he always does before a run, already in his cold weather gear. Ready? Yeah, we ran north. The water was flat and still not yet the clear summer blue it would eventually become. A few other runners, a couple with a dog moving in the opposite direction, the wind coming off the lake without apology the way it always does. At the turnaround point, I stopped and looked out at the water, not thinking about anything specific, just present, aware of the cold, the light, the sound of the water against the rocks. The ring has been in my jacket pocket for 11 weeks now. After Serena's paperwork arrived from the attorney's office, I took it off the kitchen counter and put it in my desk drawer. Gave it somewhere quiet to wait. 3 weeks later, one morning, I dropped it into my jacket pocket without much thought. It's been there since. Owen came to stand beside me at the water's edge. He has never been someone who fills silence for its own sake. That quality is worth more than I can easily say. Same time next week, he said. Yeah, we turned and ran south. Some things take longer than 11 weeks to finish becoming what they are. What I knew standing at that turnaround point, with the lake on one side and the city on the other, was this. I had given an enormous amount to something that wasn't what I thought it was, and the giving had been real, even when the thing it was going toward wasn't. That is not a comfortable thing to know about yourself, but it is a useful one. The ring is in my jacket pocket. It has been for 11 weeks. I don't wear it. I don't miss wearing it. What I miss is not knowing what I know.